So they both went back to where the suitcase was found, had a look, and there was in fact a body in this suitcase, but it wasn't even far from Dawn's house. It was sort of just over the wall, a bit further down, and in some bushes. So it was
meters away, probably.
Yeah, very, very close to the house.
Yeah.
Just a quick disclaimer, the content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, crime scenes, and other disturbing material. Listener discretion is advised. This episode is sponsored by Think Forensic.
Think Forensic are a one-stop shop for all things forensic science and crime solving. They hold experience days, as well as corporate events, team building events, and general education for primary school right the way up to university level, as well as other events and consultancy. There's also a shop where you can get your hands on all things crime solving, from evidence gathering to packaging and collecting evidence, as well as other forensic science equipment.
For more information or to book on an experience day, please visit the website. Hi everyone, and welcome back to season 2 of the Grave Secrets podcast. Woo! We're your hosts, I'm Annie.
And I'm Beth.
And season 2 is here.
I know. We did have longer than anticipated off for a break, but it was very well needed.
I feel like it started off, we posted our last episode of season 1 December, didn't we?
Yeah.
And then we thought, oh, we'll just have Christmas off and we'll have a meeting in January and we'll come back all refreshed. But we have taken a little bit longer.
Yes.
But it is for very good reason.
Very exciting.
But we can't tell you about it. Yeah. So all that build up to it, and we can't tell you why we've taken more time off. But as soon as we can, we will do. And we've been working really hard on something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alongside the podcast.
Yeah, related.
Yeah.
But yeah, alongside. And I just think we needed the break anyway, to be honest.
Yeah.
I do think when you're in it, we talk about the fact that it is quite emotional, but I think it's when you stop that you realise how much it takes it out of you.
Yeah.
So I think we needed the break anyway. Then we've been super busy with this other exciting thing.
Yeah.
And
work for both of us as well.
Yeah. So we've just needed a break. But what's been amazing is that no one's forgotten about us.
I know.
The opposite has happened.
I know, when we've been posting, everyone's still been replying to us, and people have been saying to me like, oh, when are you coming back? Like, when's your next season coming out? So it's nice to be remembered.
It is, absolutely, because we were worried that there would be no season 2 if everyone had forgotten us, but actually, I mean, I've struggled to understand the stats, but they're crazy at the minute.
They are. We're doing really well on sort of our social media side of things, and on TikTok we have just hit 500,000 views.
What?
500,000 people have watched our videos.
I had to do it in relation to football stadiums. I was asking Chris, I was like, so can you just tell me how many football stadiums that would equate to, please?
A lot.
Yeah, he said about 40. He was like, or 2 Leeds Fests, which won't mean anything to anyone outside of the UK, but that's a lot.
That is...
I mean, most people would just know that 500,000's a lot, but I have to have it in some kind of...
Yeah, put it into
bags of
perspective.
Sugar.
Yeah, so we've got 500,000 views on TikTok. We are very close to hitting 45,000 views on YouTube.
Crazy.
We've got 4,000 podcast downloads from season 1.
Perfect.
And we are very, very grateful to everyone for listening and watching us. A few people have said to me, you're going to be starting a Patreon anytime soon. And at this point, I'm not sure what extra value we can give you for your money in a Patreon.
Yeah.
But if you do want to support us, just commenting on our videos, sharing, sharing anything, liking, any support you can give us on social media is like sort of the biggest support for us at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And subscribing on YouTube as well.
Yeah, just to get us out there, really, isn't it? And you know, the YouTube, it's weird how all those views and everything have gone up in the time we've
been off. Yeah, it's really odd, isn't it?
I've been sending you every day, like, look at this, look at these new stats.
Maybe
like,
we have another break.
Yeah, we could go again and get another 500,000 views.
I do think something like a Patreon's a really good idea, but at the minute it's just time, isn't it? Like, we keep talking about all these trips we're going to do, and it's just finding time to do it. So we'll see. We'll try and film any extra content of bits that we do when we can.
Yeah.
But at the minute, I don't think it would be as consistent enough for us to feel like we were putting something good out there.
Yeah,
We're
and if
very
someone's going to pay for
fussy.
it, we are perfectionists.
Yeah.
So we need stuff done properly and planned if we're going to do it, don't we?
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe not right now, but
Might be in the works.
yeah, maybe at the end of the year. So we've also got something else to talk to you about before we get into our case. And there's an event in Huddersfield that if you are local or if you're in West Yorkshire, that our listeners might actually really like.
I'm so gutted. Unfortunately, I can't go because I'm at a hen do, which I mean is super exciting. However, this is so up my street.
It is,
it's unreal.
It is. It's a 70s disco-themed murder mystery evening.
Murder at the disco.
So it's more of like a fun vibe. But if you are local, it's at the Briarcourt Hotel in Huddersfield, which is literally up the road from me.
I know. I'm so annoyed. I can't go.
It is so close to me.
It's fancy dress as well, isn't it? Which is incredible.
The 70s disco whole fancy dress vibe.
And you just are properly immersed in it. So you get, within the ticket price, you get a 3-course meal, you get drinks, and then there are live actors, obviously, acting, that then play 3 suspects.
And you can actually sort of interact with the actors.
And interview them.
And speak to them throughout the meal. So it's like you're doing the proper investigation.
Yeah. And I don't want to ruin it for anyone, but effectively the storyline is that a DJ has come back to play at this venue, and then they're the one that gets killed. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
And then you end up investigating. So I just think it'd be so much fun.
Sounds like such a fun night.
Yeah,
doesn't
and
it?
also imagine being at a 70s discotheque and then the DJ just dies.
Yeah.
Like you would feel like you're in a Poirot.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted
You
to be in a
love that.
Poirot.
So there's DJ and live music from 10 p.m. as well. That is, did I say the date already? The 29th of March. That one is. And we will leave a link for tickets in the show notes, and we'll be posting some stuff on our social media about
and if
that anyway.
anyone goes, you've got to tell me all about it.
No, I'm gutted that you're not going to go.
I know, I want a play-by-play review.
Drop us a message.
Yeah, please. I'm just hoping that they do another one that's maybe 80s or something, and then I can go.
You
to
love
that
the
one.
80s, don't you?
Yeah,
Yeah. I think there will be more coming up as well.
80s, 70s.
But yeah, nice little fun evening out.
Yeah, so absolutely get to that if you can and make me really jealous.
Yeah. So, shall we get into our case for today?
Yes, so we do have a case for you today. They are proving incredibly popular.
Yeah.
And so I do think that season 2 will be quite case heavy, but we are still going to throw in some of the other types of episode for you.
And I think we'll still talk about the evidence in general, but within the cases. So if a certain piece of evidence pops up in the case, we can delve a bit more into maybe that within the case studies rather than separate episodes. But we've not really fully decided, have we?
No, but I quite like that because I think it's whenever we get taken by inspiration.
See, at the moment, we've planned to come back and we've planned our episodes, but I feel like we're going with the flow in terms of what you're liking or what people are liking.
We're just...
This is not us to go with the flow. Like, we need everything planned out bit by bit. But yeah, we hope you like this season as well, and we hope you've got to know us a little bit better as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So the case that we're talking about today is, it couldn't be any more local to us because it takes place in West Yorkshire, which is where we film the podcast, where we both live. So the case is incredibly local. It takes place between a place called Lightcliffe and then also Brighouse. And Brighouse is actually where we are at the minute. That's where we film.
We are sat right now in Brighouse.
Brig Hub, specifically. So it's incredibly local. It's a case that, despite us being local to, I'd not actually come across before.
Right. I had heard of this one, but I'd not heard a lot about it, which, like you said, because we're local, I thought I would know more about this case already.
And it's one that, unfortunately, is just harrowing. you never know what goes on behind closed doors.
No, it just goes to show this case, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to get stuck in. We're going to tell it you in chronological order. So we're going to give you as much backstory as we can, and then we're going to get into the events that unfolded.
Can I just say that I know we always do put a trigger warning in, but this has got descriptions of domestic violence in here. So just keep that in mind.
So today we're talking about the murder of Dawn Walker. Dawn was a mother of 3. She was a sister, an auntie, a friend to people, and she grew up with quite a close-knit family. Again, they all lived local to the area. So we're going to give you a little bit of insight into what Dawn was like as a person, and then, as I say, we're going to kind of talk you through the lead up to the events that unfolded.
Yeah. So Dawn was 52 years old, and she was a mother of 3. And the way that her daughters and her mom described Dawn, they were saying like she'd walk into a room, she'd always light up the room.
Yeah.
She was very straightforward, she was funny, she was making people laugh. And it sort of showed the way that the family spoke about her, how sort of caring and selfless Dawn was as a person. Did you get that?
Yeah, definitely. Her mum was called Ginny Walker, and when her mum was describing her as a child, she said that she had a right cute little button nose, and that as she grew up, she could be quite fiery.
Yeah.
But she was only, she grew up to only be 5 foot.
Yeah, and she was only about 7 stone as well, so she was really sort of short and slight in build as well.
And petite.
Yeah.
Beautiful as well, really lovely smile. And again, she was just all about her kids and her family. Unfortunately, her marriage broke down, which was the girl's father. And when that relationship broke down, I think Dawn just put all her efforts into her kids.
Yeah,
she focused all her energy on the kids, didn't she?
100%. She'd stayed single for quite a long time, didn't she?
Yeah.
After that. And I think she'd maybe tried dating and just never really found anyone, and didn't seem to be I think because she was preoccupied with the children growing up, probably have your hands full with the kids.
And then as they start to grow up, so the children are called Cody, Kalena and Kira Lee, and as they became of an age where they were probably getting ready to kind of either go to uni or college or whatever and leave the house, I think at that point she probably felt like it'd be nice to have someone there for her.
Yeah, I think she started feeling the loneliness when the kids were out and about, and they'll be, even as teenagers, the kids will be out with the friends more.
Yeah.
And then when they are going to move out, I think going from having a house full of kids and then all of a sudden everything's quiet, you'd feel it a lot more, wouldn't you?
Yeah, definitely. So Dawn was single by the age of 43, but then by the spring of 2018, she probably thought, right, I'm going to bite the bullet. And on Facebook, she actually started talking to someone. By this point, she's 49, and she actually talks to someone who's a scrap metal merchant, and his name is Thomas Nutt. So she starts to talk to Thomas online, and she does actually mention it to a couple of her friends. She mentioned it to her daughters.
Yeah.
And they said, we just want you to be happy, Mum, but just make sure that you don't jump into anything too soon.
Yeah, she'd been single for 12 years, which is obviously quite a long time to be on her own. And the thing with Thomas Nutt is, although they met online on Facebook, they did have mutual friends in common. So I feel like that gives you a little bit of a reassurance. Oh yeah, this person knows him, or this, it's not just a random person online. You've got some sort of connection, and I feel that's a little bit more. It makes it feel a little bit safer, doesn't it?
Yeah. And even if you don't then interact with those mutual friends and ask, just the fact that someone knows them, makes
enough to be friends with him on Facebook. Yeah, you think, oh yeah, this guy's going to be all right.
So the relationship did move quite quickly, and they were talking all the time, and Thomas was kind of giving her all of the compliments, and it seemed like it was an incredibly kind of good relationship from the off, and that he really wanted to be a part of Dawn's life. So much so that just as her daughter was about to leave home, Thomas moved in to the
It was
house.
very soon as well. They'd only been together for 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's 2 months and someone's moving in. But I think in this situation, I think Thomas was living with his mother at the time, and he couldn't live there anymore. And his mum must have said, get out.
Yeah.
And he had nowhere to live. This is what he said, he had nowhere to live. So moving in with Dawn, she probably just wanted to help him. We know she was a very helpful, caring, selfless person. So she probably thought, well, you know what, this relationship is going really good up to now. Why would I leave him out on the street sort of thing? And I think the way that he made it sound is, I've got to get out, I've got nowhere to live at all. And, Dawn had said, well, you might as well move in here. We've got the space now.
However, at that point that he moved in, the 2 girls that were living with Dawn had never met him before. He just turned up on the doorstep one day. Yeah. They'd obviously heard about him, but they'd never actually met him.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine how that would feel.
Thomas was joking about I've got all my stuff, I'm moving in, with the daughters that he'd never met. Yeah. It is all very strange, isn't it?
So after a few months of having Thomas in the house, Kalena actually moved out. Whether or not she was already planning to, I think she was at that kind of age where she was thinking about it anyway.
Yeah.
But she then did decide to move out. So at this point, it's then Dawn, Thomas Nutt, and then Kira Lee, and they're all living together in the home. The relationship from Kira Lee's perspective, because again, she has been interviewed, Kira Lee said that it was quite tense between her and Nutt, and they didn't get on all that well. They would argue, and she found it really difficult to live with him.
I think he was a bit hot-headed as well, wasn't he? She said it was really easy to, you were sort of walking on eggshells on what you were saying, because sometimes he'd react to things in ways that weren't really...
or over the top.
Yeah.
So Nutt ended up actually kicking Kira Lee out of her own home, and that was just after her 18th birthday. And again, I think people are sometimes quick to judge, and you might think, well, I would never kick my daughter, or I would never let someone kick my daughter out the home. Why didn't Dawn say anything?
Yeah.
But I think what we learn quite quickly is that there was a lot of change going on in the household. Obviously, she's in this new relationship and she doesn't want to rock the boat. Quite clearly, he is quite quick into temper. So she probably doesn't know what to do for the best. And you do feel in new relationships sometimes that there is a real difficulty in terms of balance and where you find that balance.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, because she's such a people pleaser, it would have been really difficult.
And it had moved quite quick as well. So, you never know at this point if she's thinking, oh, God, it has moved too quick and now I don't want to say anything to him.
Yeah.
Because Thomas was, in fact, 45, I think, when they met. So he was a little bit younger. And he also had 3 children of his own.
Yes.
But it doesn't seem to mention much of the children from what I...
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
So by January of 2020, Kira Lee had been gone for 6 months at this point. She ended up actually moving to Egypt, I believe it was, and was working out in Egypt. But she decided to come back home, and I think she came back for 10 days and said to her mum, I'm going to stay with you. And she was really looking forward to being back and kind of reuniting.
She said that her and her mum used to spend a lot of time together in general. So they'd have a lot of daughter and mother days. They'd be going out and doing stuff. They'd be meeting up and going shopping. They'd always be talking to each other. But over the period of this relationship, I think that had also sort of slowed down as well. There wasn't that much time that they had to the self anymore.
No.
Whereas just, I feel like they valued their time together.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that stopped. I think it's quite hard for both of them in this situation, isn't it?
Yeah. And especially if I go away for a few weeks and then go back home and mum's busy with something else, I'm like...
You're like, what can you possibly be busy with?
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah. So, it would be really difficult. And another thing that then added to the difficulty was that Kira Lee said she noticed a change in her mum pretty instantly, and the way that Nut was behaving towards her mother just was disrespectful, and he was really treating her, awfully. And so much so that Dawn was actually poorly during those 10 days. So she'd gone to bed and was hoping to feel better. And Nut actually basically kicked off and threw a Paddy because, who was going to cook his tea? Yeah. And and you just think like a loving partner would maybe
not do that.
Yeah, no, they'd either bring you a cup of tea or check in on you and just make sure that you're okay.
Yeah.
Even if you're a patient that likes to be left alone.
There was none of that.
But there was no compassion whatsoever.
It was all about himself, wasn't it? Well, who's going to cook my tea?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he's a grown man. If he can't cook his tea and sort of help his girlfriend out when she's ill, like there's something wrong.
Yeah. So it got to the point where Kira Lee said, right, I'm going to say something. And she actually went upstairs in the home to speak to Nut and said, you can't keep speaking to my mother like this. It's disrespectful. And at which point he actually pressed Kira Lee up against a wall and hit her head against the wall so hard because it got the corner of the wall that she split her head open and was bleeding. So he's now physically assaulted as well as being verbally abusive to Dawn. He's now physically assaulted Kira Lee, Dawn's daughter.
And as well, just to put it into perspective, Thomas Nutt is a big guy.
Yeah.
He was
actually moving these pieces of scrap metal.
Himself. He was a big, strong man.
Yeah.
And we've said about Dawn being, 5 foot and petite.
Yeah.
And Kira Lee didn't look any different, really, did she? She looked quite petite.
Yeah. And she's 18 years old. Imagine being physically assaulted by such a huge, overbearing man who's someone that you should be able to trust.
Yeah, and it was brave of her to stand up to him in the first place as well, to stand her ground and say, no, you don't talk to my mum like this.
Yeah.
As an 18-year-old, as a woman who's much smaller than him, I thought straight away that was such a brave thing to do, incredibly. To stick up for your mum.
Yeah. So at that stage, Nut then did leave the house, and they'd actually got a caravan that was parked in the garden of the property, which was his caravan. So he said he was going to stay in there overnight. But he then bombarded Dawn with messages, basically blaming Kira Lee for this altercation.
This is what I don't get, though. He bombarded her with messages from the caravan, parked outside the house, when Dawn's in the house. Like, why not, communicate?
I know, but she would feel so tense as well, because you know that he's right there.
And you're thinking, is he going to come in?
Yeah.
What's going to happen?
It's just so difficult, isn't it? And then obviously she's got the horror of knowing that her daughter's just been assaulted by her boyfriend.
Yeah.
So Kira Lee then ended up leaving the house herself because, again, likely she didn't feel safe. And Dawn actually did let Nut back into the house rather than staying in the caravan. But again, I think what we're starting to get a feel for here is that this relationship is not a safe relationship and that Dawn is probably incredibly scared.
Yeah, and it's now you're starting to see the signs of the controlling behaviour towards Dawn in terms of what we touched on earlier about the isolating her from, her kids and spending time with her family. And at this point as well, Dawn didn't have that many friends.
No.
Which before she did. So it's almost like he'd got straight to work, isolating her and controlling her, which is the signs of, domestic abuse. Yeah.
So Kira Lee obviously spoke to her older sister about what had happened, and at that point, Kalena gave her mum an ultimatum. And again, you can completely understand why they did this, but they basically said, look, mum, it's us or him. And again, it's really difficult because unfortunately, Dawn did stay with Nut, and I think that did really fracture the relationship between the girls.
Yeah, and I totally understand this from the daughter's point of view of my mum's chose her boyfriend over us, but you don't, like we said before about what goes on behind closed doors, Dawn probably didn't want to choose, but there wasn't a choice for her in terms of keeping herself safe.
Yeah.
So when you look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, it's just so difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, things escalated at this stage, because by then we started to go into lockdown. So unfortunately, COVID happened, and the UK went into lockdown. So Dawn is now estranged from her closest family members, living with Nut, who is abusive and controlling, and they're now like literally locked pretty much in the house together.
I think there's a lot that I've seen recently on domestic abuse about how things have started in lockdown and people couldn't physically get out. You couldn't even leave the house, never mind.
And even just talking to other people, you know, it's not like you can nip down to the shop, or you'd maybe go to a gym class once a week and confide in someone.
You're stuck, aren't you?
If, you know, for a lot of these people, the only thing that they would be able to do would be text or call. But as we know, in relationships such as these, quite often they are in the room if you're on the phone. They're taking the phone to make sure that you've not been texting anyone.
Yeah.
Like, the level of control is unbelievable, and it's really difficult and isolating for those people when they're in those situations.
Yeah, and that's without COVID. So imagine how... Obviously, COVID has just enhanced everything, hasn't it?
So during this time, Dawn's family actually receive, again, Facebook messages, but this time from a woman, the mother of Nut's children, who was in an abusive relationship with Nut for a period of years. Again, she is the mother of his children, and she basically is warning the family of how dangerous Nut can be. She says that she's got a restraining order out on him, and that there is a restraining order in place, which means that he can't see any of the 3 children. Now, from what we know about other cases, that is quite rare. Generally speaking, courts are not quick to prevent the father from seeing the child. Yeah. They will do... visits with supervised visits. So there would either be supervised visits, or it might be monthly contact, but it's very rare that there is no contact whatsoever
at all.
So that tells you something about the scale of the violence.
And I think in this situation, it was good of the ex to come forward and
again,
warn
incredibly
someone
brave
else. Because I know we have sort of like the Clare's Law thing at the moment, but I think you have to have a reason, don't you? And you contact the police to then get the background information on that person. So it's like a pre-warning, but it's also what the family already know. It confirms what their suspicions are, doesn't it?
But unfortunately, in Dawn's case, when you are that in love, because again, what people don't always understand is that domestic abuse relationships are really complicated. They do absolutely love that person. That person would have spent the first months of that relationship love bombing them, convincing them that they are the most wonderful person in the world, and the relationship to begin with is generally pretty amazing. And it's at that point that they start to filter in this behaviour. So Dawn would have been really conflicted. And again, she's probably been told by Nut that his ex is crazy.
We've heard the story a million times, haven't we?
You know? So she probably thinks, well, maybe she's wanting to get back with him, or she's probably doing anything she can in her own mind to convince herself that that isn't true, because that is scary and that is dangerous.
And we just know that he's made himself out to be the victim.
Yeah, of course.
Obviously, he will have said to her, she's done this, she's done that, she's stopped me seeing my children. Like, there will be all that as well. But like we said, to get a restraining order and to not see your children is not, like, they don't just do that for everyone.
No. So, again, in her relationship, I believe she was called Kimberly.
Right.
In that previous relationship, the police had been called numerous times. He'd actually once assaulted her in front of their 5-year-old child.
He punched her in the face, hadn't he? It was absolutely awful.
So it was horrific, and all she could do, obviously, was try and warn Dawn. About the situation. So now we are kind of gaining this evidence that suggests that Nut is abusive. We've got more and more kind of evidence that's backing it up. He's been physically abusive to Kira Lee. And what starts to come out that the family start to see is that there have been instances of physical abuse to Dawn. And primarily, this information comes from their neighbours.
Yeah.
So they were in a semi-detached and terrace house, council house.
You can hear everything in there as well. When I've lived in a semi-detached house before, I have heard every conversation that the neighbours have had, and that's not even been shouting. That's a normal conversation.
Yeah.
So you can just imagine if anything else happens, the neighbours would have heard every bit of that conversation.
Yeah.
And in this case, they were, screaming, there was shouting, there was arguing.
At one point, Dawn was heard shouting, "Tomo, get off me."
Yeah.
So again, that's not something that, happens in a normal, safe relationship.
No.
So the neighbours had, again, gone round on numerous occasions to make sure that Dawn was safe. But in 2020, Dawn had actually been seen with a black eye, and she had confided in one of her daughters at that stage and said, "I feel like something bad is going to happen to me."
Yeah. Just to think that though and be so scared of your life and scared to go home and scared of your partner is just awful, isn't it?
At one point as well, one of the neighbours said that they'd actually gone round to check that Dawn was okay, and Tomo came to the top of the stairs and was kind of screaming and shouting, but basically said that now there are two accounts of this, because I saw somewhere that Nut had said that she was bipolar and off her medication.
Yeah,
so she was depressed
and it had affected her. I saw that one as well.
But then I've also seen another account where he was saying that she was asthmatic and that she couldn't breathe, so she was screaming because she couldn't breathe.
Oh.
But again, if anyone's asthmatic, you know that you physically wouldn't be able to, because you're trying to catch your breath.
Yeah, I feel like he's always trying to put the blame on someone else. And in this situation, putting the blame on Dawn and making it out to be her fault, isn't it? Oh, it's because she's not off her meds. It's because she's got asthma. Whichever one it is, it was putting the blame on her.
So by September 2020, Kira Lee then receives a phone call, and it was from her mum's phone, but it was actually the neighbour that was on the phone. And she said, "You need to come here for your mum. She's been really seriously assaulted at the hands of Nut." And at that stage, they went round. There were signs that Dawn had been strangled, and she'd actually got broken ribs and damage to her ribs.
The thing is, though, you just think in how, obviously, strangulation in general is absolutely awful. And it's very, personal as well. And we spoke before about how long you have to hold your hands on someone's neck for them not to be able to breathe.
Yeah.
It's sort of a prolonged thing. And then to break someone's ribs, how hard must he have hit her to break her ribs?
It's horrific, isn't it?
Yeah.
And again, it's just so scary for everyone involved. Obviously, Dawn will be broken as a person emotionally as well as physically.
And this is the person she thinks she loves.
Yeah.
That's done this to her.
But then you've also got the neighbours. Imagine hearing that for one, and then physically going around and seeing Dawn in that state. It's just, you would just feel so helpless.
Yeah.
And then obviously her daughter having to see her in such a state.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the police did get involved at this stage, because Dawn did agree to take the case to the police. Obviously, there was an awful lot of evidence, so Nut was arrested and he was held on charges. He was actually then on remand for a month, so he was held for a month.
It just shows how dangerous he was as well to be remanded in this situation.
Yeah.
I've seen similar things to this happen before, and they've been released straight away. And the longer that the person is remanded for is the longer time they are away from the victim. Therefore, there's more chance of breaking that bond.
Yes.
So in this case, I think the family will have thought they've got over a month away from each other. The bond will be broken. We can get her back, and we can get the old Dawn back.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though,
that wasn't the case.
No. And again, Dawn was probably, as much as she's got a family there, she's probably in this house on her own.
Yeah.
And still scared. And we don't know whether or not, and in fact, the detective in the case said they don't actually know how much communication Dawn and Nut had in this time period, but something was enough for Dawn to drop the charges.
Yeah, they think that he was in contact and still controlling her. So like we first thought, there would be sort of a clean break and she'd have that time away.
Yeah.
If you haven't got that, you're still under the person's control.
But also, even if she'd have gone through with it,
yeah,
and he would still be released even after a number of years,
yeah,
she'd probably think that her life was in danger.
Oh, yeah.
If she went through with it. So, you know, again, there's that element of safety. And she probably thought, if I drop the charges, one, this might have given him the kind of realisation that he needs in order to stop abusing me, because now people know about it. The police have been aware. But then equally, she might just think that it's the safer option because... you know, if she drops the charges, he'll love her and nothing bad will happen to her.
And as well, from a safety point of view, he's already assaulted Dawn's daughter, so he's got no qualms about doing that, has he?
No.
So she might think the safety of my family as well.
Yeah.
Like, what if something happens to the kids?
Yeah. And he's got financial control over at this stage as well.
Yeah.
So there's just so many layers.
Wasn't he?
Yeah, there's so many layers. So he, again, was released then from custody, and unfortunately he did then move straight back in with Dawn. The family, obviously, were not happy about this, but, you know, Dawn's struggling and he can't step in.
I'm sorry, but I love him.
Yeah.
That's what she said to her daughter. And unfortunately, she did let him move straight back into the house with her.
So by spring 2021, Kira Lee is a new mum. She is with her boyfriend and she asks to live back with her mum. She wants a mum's support. It's a really exciting time. So she actually moves back in with Dawn and Nut, but she's seeing her boyfriend regularly. I'm not actually sure whether he was living there or whether he was just round there quite a lot.
Yeah.
But she did say that Nut's behaviour changed dramatically.
Yeah.
He wasn't as tense, he wouldn't pick fights with Kira Lee like he had done previously, and Kira Lee strongly believes that that is because there was another male presence around, and you know, Nut clearly doesn't have any respect for anyone, but it does seem like he acted differently around men.
Yeah.
But again, these people that are abusive, you know, they're not these big bravado characters that they give off. They're incredibly insecure, which is the reason that they are abusing people. So he probably was worried about what someone else would do if he kicked off. You know, it's a way of exerting power quite often over women.
I think though that Dawn, he was acting.
Yes.
Because he was making Dawn believe that he had changed.
Yeah.
So then in turn, Dawn said to Kira Lee, oh, he's changed. He's a totally different person. Come and see for yourself.
Yeah.
So then when Kira Lee was in the house as well, she was like...
yeah, maybe he's turned a corner.
Yeah, like, has he? And she did say he did seem very, very different. He wasn't as triggered.
Yeah.
They didn't argue. And she thought, oh, is this it? Like, could it be? But I think there's always that niggling feeling in the back of your mind, isn't it? Like when someone's had a past like that.
And at this point, again, Nut knows exactly what he's doing. He's managed to give off this impression that he's changed and he's better. And at that stage, he then proposes to Dawn and they are engaged. So by again later into the year, so from spring onwards,
I think it was summer, wasn't it?
Yeah, Dawn then tells Kira Lee that she plans to marry Nut on the 27th of October later that year. Kira Lee did say she still thinks it's too soon. Obviously, this good behaviour hasn't lasted as long as
not long enough to be married. Yeah,
but says, you know, I can't stop you.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
It's horrible for the daughters to be in that situation where they can't do anything about it either.
Yeah,
isn't it?
I know.
You know, you want to do all you can to help, but you don't want to also upset your mum at the same time.
And again, Kalena, the eldest, had got still a fractured relationship with her mum, but Dawn did actually reach out to her a few weeks before the wedding and ask her to be a bridesmaid.
Yeah.
So both girls said that they would be there for their mum, and that I felt was really lovely.
Yeah.
Because although they kind of don't support Nut,
they still support the
wanted
mom.
to be there for the mom.
Yeah, they did say though in the lead up to the wedding, Dawn wasn't her usual self. They went shopping for the bridesmaid dresses, Dawn's wedding dress, and she didn't seem as interested as they thought she would
she wasn't
be.
excited about it.
Yeah.
It was just as if it was something she needed to do.
Yeah, it was a chore just to sort of get it out of the way and get it done, which in the run up to your wedding, you should be, if one thing as a woman you would be excited about is getting your dress and seeing your bridesmaids try on their dress, and especially being the daughters as well. It just seemed like something was maybe a little bit off even in the run up to the wedding. Yeah. And maybe she was questioning, should we be getting married? But she's now in a position where she can't turn around and say no.
Well, she even said to one of her daughters, I'm worried that he's going to leave me at the altar.
Yeah.
Which again is heartbreaking because it's so derogatory against herself. It's like she doesn't think she's worthy.
Yeah.
And that he might find a better option.
Yeah.
And leave her for either someone else or just leave her at the altar embarrassed.
Yeah, it's a self-esteem, isn't it, that he's just knocked down that much, I think, over the time leading up to the wedding for you to think like that.
So she had actually spoken to one of her friends as well and said that she was worried that she was making the wrong decision, but she didn't feel like she'd got a choice. So again, it's so difficult because she is reaching out to people, but there's only so much people can do. You've kind of just got to be there to support the person in it, because it's not as easy as just upping and leaving.
Yeah.
So then we come to the 27th of October. That's the day of the wedding. It was quite a small scale wedding. They got married at the registry office, and then again they actually had the reception in a pub in Brighouse. So on the morning of the wedding, apparently Dawn was shaking. She was really nervous and edgy. And again, her daughter, Kira Lee, asked what was wrong. And she just said, I just think something bad is going to happen. Now, again, whether or not this was that he was going to leave her at the altar or whether or not she meant after the wedding, we don't know. But I think the girls were just trying to support their mum, and they kind of said, don't worry about it, it's just nerves.
I think they were keeping her calm as well, because if she was like shaking, I think they sort of said we thought it could have been just wedding nerves in general.
Yeah.
So we were just trying to like brush it off and sort of keep my mum calm.
Yeah.
And they said she was just getting ready really slow in the morning, like she didn't really want to do it.
And they checked in with her again when they got to the registry office. And again, she just said, I don't know, I'm just nervous. So the marriage took place. Meanwhile, Dawn's mum, Ginny, had no idea that the wedding was going on.
Yeah, when I saw this, I was like, wow.
Yeah, I thought this was quite interesting because to me, if I know I'm making a bad decision, the last person I'm going to tell is my
your
mum.
mum. Yeah, because your mum's going to tell you the truth and say, are you really going to do this? And I think Dawn knew that by telling her mum, her mum would obviously be against it because of what happened
Which
in the
again
past
is
in the relationship.
heartbreaking, because this is a prime example of one of those situations where that's the one person you should be telling because they can help.
Yeah, and it's meant to be the happiest time of your life when you are going to marry someone.
Yeah, but unfortunately, she hadn't told her mum. So the wedding took place. They had a few friends meet them at the pub, and by all accounts, they had a really nice time. Everyone was in good spirits. Dawn didn't really drink a lot anyway, generally, and apparently Nut was more intoxicated, but they still got a taxi home, which was like 6 minutes in a taxi. And again, the taxi driver said that they seemed in quite good spirits.
Yeah, they were sort of like talking in the back of the taxi. He said you could tell they'd had like a bit to drink, but no one was like absolutely paralytic.
No. And it was only 10:30. I say only because I'm like, but it was 10:30 that they actually then returned to Dawn's home.
I think one of the daughters though said she left at 7:30, but Dawn did actually only have her two daughters at the wedding to support her, and the rest of the people there were Thomas's family and his friends there. So again, just to have your two daughters there, not have any friends or the rest of your family, is just really sad in itself, isn't it?
Yeah. So then the couple had got like a Ring doorbell type thing on their house. So you see them getting out the taxi, they're like carrying gifts and things, and they're going back into the house. And the plan was that the next morning they were going to get up, and again in the caravan they were going to go off to Skegness for a few days. And there was a bit of debate as to how long they were actually going to go for. And this was something that was then argued about while they were away. So they went to Skegness in the caravan, left the following morning. But there were a couple of things that didn't seem quite right. So Dawn had left washing out on the line, which she didn't tend to do usually.
She usually got up early and she'd do all the jobs, and she just wouldn't leave her washing out on the line all day. And it was just little jobs that had not been done, wasn't it? That the neighbours had noticed.
Yeah, and one of the neighbours, again, because they know Dawn, had said like, oh, where is she this morning? Like, usually she's up and about. And Nut had actually said, oh, yeah, she's got a hangover. Yeah. And again, that seemed really odd because she
didn't drink much.
No, she didn't drink much.
And even the taxi driver said they didn't seem that drunk to be at that level the next day.
Yeah.
But the neighbours had sort of started to pick up on this, which I think is good, because the small things about the curtains being closed in the house where he said Dawn was in bed, the neighbours knew that Dawn would get up early most days. Yeah. She would open the curtains, she would be out in the garden, she would have brought the washing off the line.
Yeah.
So all these little things now, the neighbours are starting to add together as well, aren't they?
So the couple go off to Skegness, and again, by all accounts, while they were there, Dawn had said that they were having, see, again, there's kind of two accounts on this, isn't there?
Because she'd text a
in
daughter.
One account, they'd said, she just said, we're having a lovely time, everything's fine, but they'd not really heard anything else. And then, again, Nut was reported to have sent a text that basically said that they'd had an argument about when to come home. He wanted to come home for Halloween, and she wanted to stay, and he said, I'm going to have to get rid of her because his new wife was effectively being annoying and they'd had this fallout.
Yeah, and he'd said this to the neighbour, I think, in a text. So the stories are conflicting really, because you've got Dawn messaging her daughter saying, oh yeah, we're having a really nice time, do you want to meet up when I get back? We can go and do some shopping, meet me at Wilco's. But then on the other hand, you've got Nut messaging the neighbour saying, oh, we're having a bit of a disagreement here about when to come back.
So 3 days later, after the wedding, Ciara Lee receives a text from her mum that says, sorry love, I've lost my phone, but can you meet me outside Wilco at 10:30? Now again, I've lost my phone, but texting from the phone doesn't make sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or was it, I'd lost my phone, which is why you've not heard from me for 3 days?
I thought that the text message might have come from Thomas's phone saying like, oh, it's me.
It's me.
Yeah, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I've lost my phone.
Right,
but it wasn't really clear. Yeah.
No. So Ciara Lee obviously responded to her mum and then turned up at the Wilco in Brighouse for 10:30. Dawn didn't turn up, which was very strange because, again, Ciara Lee was there, but she'd also got a grandson who was still young at this point.
She knew her mum was going to want to see him, especially when she's been away for a few days or something. Her mum had never not turned up for anything before. She was always really reliable. So straight away, when she doesn't turn up, Ciara Lee couldn't ring her mum either because of the lost phone situation. So at this point, she would ring Thomas and say, where's my mom? And he said, oh, she set off at whatever time, 9 o'clock.
Ago.
Yeah. So it doesn't take an hour to get into...
Well, we've said it takes 6 minutes from where they were living into the centre of Brighouse, and she's now meant to be meeting her daughter in the centre of Brighouse, but she set off an hour ago. So again, the timings don't align. So Ciara Lee waited a little bit longer, then again said, right, I'm going to wait another 15 minutes after she'd spoken to Nut, and said, I'll see if she turns up, and then she didn't. So Ciara Lee then starts driving around looking for where her mum might be in the car parks and things.
Going on the routes as well that she thought she might take, or even the shops that she might have visited on the way, because if you've not got a phone, it might be harder to keep track of time.
Yeah.
So she thought she might have been in somewhere and just lost track of time and was running late, sort of thing.
But then she becomes increasingly worried and then reaches out to the older daughter, Kalena, and at that point, the girls then did start to worry. So Ciara Lee then goes back to Dawn's house, and it was really odd. She said Nut was just making odd comments like, oh, I've cleaned the whole house this morning, and he didn't seem massively concerned. And it was actually the neighbour who was round because the neighbour had heard that Dawn was missing that managed to convince Nut that they should ring it into the police and report Dawn missing.
They said he was being really acting quite normal though as well. So Kira Lee actually went with her child.
Yeah.
And when they got to the house, he was making food for them or whatever, or got him lunch or something like that. And I just think, who in that situation, when you're worried about someone, I'm sure Kira Lee wasn't probably thinking about having her lunch.
No.
She's wanting to find her mum, and he's just not in this situation taking it seriously. She'd said to him, you need to report this to the police. And it was almost like he was delaying it. But then eventually when the neighbour came in and said, look, basically forced him to ring the police.
And at that point he took a turn, and at that point he basically told Kira Lee to get out.
Everyone needed to leave the house.
And he was going to report his wife missing. So again, this is 3 days after he's married, supposedly the love of his life.
Should be the happiest time of your life.
And now she's missing. So the police did take this seriously from the off, just in terms of how unlikely it was that she would have disappeared of her own volition.
Yeah.
They knew that they'd recently got married. The daughters said that how out of character this was. So the police did start investigating very quickly and inevitably then discovered Nut's previous convictions.
Yeah, so the police did I was quite happy about them taking this seriously straight away, because sometimes it can be like, oh, has she done this? Is she going to stay with someone else?
Yeah.
But they seemed to take it serious from the off.
Yeah.
And so did the neighbours and so did the family as well. It was sort of everyone pulled together.
Yeah.
In this situation to try and help find Dawn, didn't they?
So Dawn is missing at this stage. The police have told Nut that they will be coming round to the house to obviously talk to him about what he thinks might have happened. And the neighbours were really invested in trying to help find Dawn. One of them actually made a throwaway comment because, again, bear in mind, yes, it's 3 days post-wedding, but it's also post-Halloween. And Nut had actually decorated the whole of the front garden with all of these, Halloween decorations and crime scene tape and everything. And so one of the neighbours was like, oh, where have you buried her?
Yeah.
And at that point, apparently he just burst into tears and was really, almost overly emotional. So he went from being really unemotional almost and not concerned to then the neighbour making this comment and being really overly emotional.
Having an emotional outburst, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really.
Shortly after this, the police then went round to Nut's home, obviously just to ask for any information that he might have. And he was really sweaty. He was sweating profusely and just acting a little bit odd. And they asked him why he was so sweaty, to which he said that he'd lost track of time while he was at the shop and that he'd run back so that he could make it back for the police to then talk to him.
I just don't understand what could be more important than the police coming round to talk about your missing wife. Why would you lose track of time? Why would you even go to the shop in the first place?
Yeah.
It's not important.
And I can't imagine that you'd be that sweaty from
running back from the shop.
Yeah. It just seemed odd. The police said it was a little bit odd. Nut basically then said that he wasn't sure where Dawn was, but she'd got a history of mental health issues, which has never been proven. That was just his claim.
No, his family, Dawn's family never really said anything about that either, did they? So it seemed to be something that he'd just gone along with.
Part of his story that he wanted to tell.
Yeah.
So the police left, but said that they would be back to search the property, which would be standard in a missing persons case. And so as the community are at this stage looking for Dawn and they're out there looking for anywhere that she might be, one of the neighbours said to Nut, why don't we go out and look for her? And he said that him and Dawn used to do a certain walk that led through a cemetery. So said, let's follow that path and see if she's there.
You'd be thinking of all the places that she could have been, the places she visited. Mm-hmm. I think some people were out in the cars looking for Dawn. Some people were walking. It seemed like the community had really pulled together in
the search for her. Yeah. But he did make a really strange comment while they were walking. He basically turned to this neighbour and said, I'm really glad that you're here with me because I don't want anyone to think that I've killed her, or people might think that I've killed her.
And he says that she's not even... You don't even know that anything has happened to Dawn at this point.
Yeah.
She is a missing person. So for someone to say that, it's suspicious in general.
Yeah,
but I think that... Oh, yeah, we're back to saying that's suspicious. But I think the neighbour at this point probably thought as well, oh, that was a bit of an odd thing to say.
Yeah.
But at the same time, his partner was actually out searching in sort of like the open fields out of the back of the house, because you could come out of the back of the house and it sort of backed onto fields and bushes. And while they were searching in there, she actually came across a suitcase. So she didn't open the suitcase or anything herself. She went back to the house and met up with a partner, and she told him about her sort of suspicions, and he said, right, I'll come back with you and we'll go and have a look at it together. So they both went back to where the suitcase was found, had a look, and there was, in fact, a body in this suitcase, but it wasn't even far from Dawn's house. It was sort of just over the wall, a bit further down, and in some bushes. So it was...
meters away, probably.
Yeah, very, very close to the house.
Yeah. So they did then look in the suitcase, and unfortunately it was a body. When officers obviously attended the scene, I think pretty quickly it was safe to assume that it was the body of Dawn. Obviously, she would then have to be identified. But at that stage, Nutt was then arrested for murder. So it all happened quite quickly.
So this is still all on one day, really, because on Halloween, on the 31st, obviously Dawn didn't turn up for the meeting. There was the morning. Search. This is all still on the 31st. So imagine how much has gone on in that day.
Yeah. And it was actually by 5 o'clock that Kalina received a call again from like a neighbour and a family friend to say, have you heard about your mum? She then said, oh, yeah, I know she's missing, but, she'll turn up. I'm not too worried about it. At which point the family friend had to make her aware that her mother was dead.
Yeah,
and you just
horrible.
can't imagine, can you, that kind of call. So at that point, obviously, the girls then met up and then were being interviewed by the police.
It was actually one of the daughters that had to identify Dawn.
Yeah,
like, how bad would that be? But she said she wanted to go and identify her mum, because she thought there must be some mistake. I don't believe that my mum's dead. I need to see it for myself.
Well, it's a bit like, the situation with Dawn, isn't it? When you don't want to believe what someone's telling you about how horrific he is. You don't want it to be real.
But she said that when she had a look and when she saw her mum, it didn't really look... She knew it was a mum, but she didn't look herself. She had injuries, she had swelling on her face, she had bruises. It must have been really horrific for her to see that, but she did know that it was a mum.
So when Nutt was arrested, it was actually off the back of something very unexpected.
Yeah.
And that was because he had actually decided to effectively hand himself in. He walked into West Yorkshire Police Station and actually turned round and said his account of what happened, which ultimately was a manslaughter account.
Again, though, he's trying to manipulate and trying to control the situation. By him handing himself in, he knows the next step is for the police to have a look at him.
Yeah.
So he thinks, if I get in there first and say my story and say what's happened, then, I could probably... convince people that this is what happened.
Even the comment that to the neighbour, that was selfish. It wasn't, I hope my wife's okay. It was, I hope I don't look like I've done it.
Yeah, it's all about himself again, isn't it?
Yeah. So he then gives an account, and initially Nutt stated that after 2 days of them being away, Dawn said that she was going to ask for a divorce and report him for rape and abuse, which he claimed never had occurred. And at that point, she then went to attack him. She was brazening a knife, and he then felt like he had to protect himself from this 5 foot, very slight lady.
And restrain her.
He said that he hit her in the face, and then he put his arm around her neck, and that was to try and restrain her.
But none of that is restraining.
No.
To restrain someone, you could hold the arms.
Yeah.
She's very small. You could have held her arms and she probably wouldn't have been able to move.
No.
You could hold her wrists. Like,
Yeah.
you're strangling someone and hitting someone in the face is not restraining them.
No, it's not. But he then said that she went limp, and that when she didn't regain consciousness, he then realised what he'd done. That was the first account that he gave. Again, I think at this stage, police are very unlikely to be taking him, at face value for this account, because again, it's very self-serving. He then claimed a slightly different turn of events, and basically said that it was after the honeymoon. After they got back from the wedding, she had then turned around and said that she was still married to her ex-husband, so that their wedding wasn't legitimate, and that basically she had then provoked him, and at which point, she'd been threatening. But there were so many different accounts that he gave. Again, in another account, he said that he'd been to the shop, and when he got back, she was there with a knife, and that he felt unsafe and tried to protect himself.
It was all about him again.
Yeah.
It's all this fabricated story to make him look better in this situation, and to make Dawn look like she was, trying to attack him, and she was crazy,
unstable.
and mentally unstable, which is what is like
preempted all the way
before.
along. So ultimately, even though Nutt had given multiple accounts of his version of events, the police still charged him with murder rather than manslaughter.
They just saw straight through it, didn't they? It weren't even a debate.
Again, they've got all these previous convictions to go on as well, and so they were then the investigation then unfolded. But what we're going to do is skip to the trial, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the police believed the events that actually unfolded were.
Yeah.
So it actually went to trial on the 25th of July, 2022. So it was actually at Bradford Crown Court, and it was a relatively short trial, really.
Yeah.
Considering the amount of and the amount of evidence that there was. Again, Nutt had only admitted manslaughter, but the family and obviously the prosecution were pushing for a murder charge. And he was just still sticking to the story that he hadn't intended to kill his wife.
Yeah.
He maintained that he was just responding to Dawn's attack, and that's what had happened.
He actually went into court still with his wedding ring on and kept looking down at it. Like, you just think everything about this is sort of premeditated, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he's thought about what would get him sympathy with a jury.
Yeah, what would look good.
Yeah, what would look good on him.
But then at the same time, apparently he was acting that like kind of cool, calm and collected, that it just didn't make sense for him to be an innocent man that's lost his wife and is now being accused of her murder. Like,
his family
you'd be so
even
scared.
said that he was like so just unbothered by anything, and at one point he looked over at the daughters and they said he was like smirking as well. So on one hand he's planned like to look sad with the wedding ring, but then on the other hand
he's not doing a very good job,
making himself look like an idiot, smiling over something so serious. So I just can't put myself in the position of what the family must have been feeling in this.
No, horrific. And to hear about all of the abuse. So the police believe that Dawn never actually made it on her honeymoon. They didn't believe that she had ever been to Skegness, and that actually Nutt had murdered Dawn on the night of their wedding, and she was murdered on her wedding day.
Yeah.
So again, prosecution brought up witnesses like the taxi driver that said that Dawn really hadn't drunk that much. It didn't make sense what he'd said to the neighbour about her being in bed hungover, and no one other than Nutt had actually seen Dawn after the taxi driver had seen them get back into their house.
He was the last person to be seen on camera with her, wasn't he?
Nutt, however, was seen, and he was seen in his garden or leaving the house at about 12:30 on the wedding night, and then seen again in the back garden smoking a cigarette about 1:30. So he was seen multiple times, but Dawn was never seen.
Yeah. he left the house on that night as well, and he'd gone out and gone to a cash machine, and he'd actually pulled like his jumper up so you couldn't see his face, and drawn £200 out of the bank on Dawn's card. So like, why on your wedding night would you need to leave the house to then go to the shop to draw
200 quid out?
And obviously the police are thinking now, did Dawn even make it to Skegness?
Yeah.
They checked the ANPR cameras, and at one of the toll roads they could see clearly into whatever car
like
or van they were
windscreen.
driving, and there was no one in the passenger seat.
He'd actually got stuff on the passenger seat. So Dawn
you could
wasn't
see
in.
him, and Dawn wasn't even there, which is obviously what prompted them to think she must have been killed before that.
Yeah. Again, it was just little things like when they were supposedly both got back from the caravan holiday, Nut had actually asked the neighbour to help him like get it in position on the drive and park it up. But that's something that Dawn would have already like always done usually. So she just hadn't been seen. And the belief is that, again, Nut murdered his wife on their wedding day, and then he decided to go on the honeymoon to basically buy himself some time and so that it didn't look suspicious. So again, he was quite calculated. He then left in the caravan and he decided to stay in a lay-by. Now, he'd initially said that the reason that they'd stayed in a lay-by is just because there were less people around and they could just watch DVDs in the lay-by in Skegness.
Yeah.
But what the police actually believe was that obviously if they were staying on a caravan site, there would be more chance of people noticing that he was there on his own.
Yeah, you will have
if they
been
were
seen.
questioned rather than seeing him with his wife. Whereas if he's in a lay-by, no one's going to know.
Yeah. But he didn't know at this point that they had seen the ANPR cameras and that they'd already seen that Dawn wasn't in the car with them.
Yeah. So again, Nut then did turn round at one point and say that he had kept Dawn's body in the kitchen cupboard in her own home. All the while, he's then out decorating the outside of the house for Halloween. It's just so
he's put
calculated.
her in the cupboard, he's gone to Skegness, he's come back, he's decorated the house, and all this time, Dawn's body is still in the house, in the cupboard.
What's worse is that Kira Lee and her son
were in the house. But this all leads in, and this will tie a few things in for you now. So because Dawn's body was in the house, when he reported Dawn missing to the police, he knew the police were going to come out and do a visit. So then he had to think, right, I've got to remove the body from the house. That's why all of a sudden he said, right, everyone out, clearing everyone out of the house, because he needed to then move Dawn's body to another location for when the police came round. And on some CCTV footage, again from his and Dawn's house, he's seen dragging quite a heavy suitcase down to the bottom of the garden, and he's making it looks like it's hard work.
Yeah, and
for
again,
him as
bear
well.
in mind how big he is of a man.
Yeah, it looks,
dragging most things in a suitcase wouldn't have been.
It looks like he's struggling a little bit. And then he comes back to the house, and that is when the police then came round. So he'd not been to the shop previously, is what he'd been doing in the time between ringing the police and the police turning up at the house. He had been disposing of Dawn's body in the suitcase.
Yeah.
And that's why he was sweating, because he'd obviously rushed to get it all done and get back to the house. And I think that's why she was dumped so close to the house as well, because he'd not had time to go any further away.
So he'd spoken to the officers, which again they said was strange, and then straight after they'd left, he went back into the garden, and he's then seen kind of with his shoe kind of wiping the ground to try and get rid of the tyre tracks from the suitcase, so that you can't obviously tell where he's been.
That footage
but it's just
really
horrific.
Chilling.
It's absolutely chilling. Because again, it's the middle of the day, it's like midday, and he's just so overtly, he's just moving the body of his wife. It's horrific.
I think he did it in broad daylight because he obviously didn't have a choice in this. But the suitcase wasn't a huge suitcase, and we know that Dawn was quite a small person. But the post-mortem actually showed loads of injuries. So some were before death and some were after death. So she got significant injuries to her face.
But what had also, which he'd not really thought about, is because he'd kept her in the home for a period of days, obviously the elements hadn't got to her. So the rate of decomposition had slowed, or it wasn't as quick as it would have been if she'd have been outside the whole time. So again, this was great in terms of evidence because it meant that they could get a better gauge for what had happened.
Yeah.
Whereas if she'd have been outside, then obviously you've got things like scavengers and you've got the elements.
She was fairly preserved. But one thing I did see about this, to get Dawn into the suitcase, you had to significantly injure her.
Yeah.
And I think it was one of the detectives or the CSIs was saying that rigor mortis had set in. But if you think about the timings for rigor mortis, so rigor mortis is the stiffening of the muscles that happens after death. So it starts about 2 hours after death, and it usually starts in the upper part of the body, so people get like a stiff jaw, and then it goes down to the limbs. So it's usually complete in around 8 to 10 hours. So if she was killed on her wedding night, then probably 8 to 10 hours later, the rigor mortis is set in. But then what a lot of people don't know is that the rigor is then released 24 to 36 hours after death. So the body then returns to a relaxed state. So if she's killed on her wedding night, by the time she's put into the suitcase, there wouldn't be rigor mortis because it had already have been released. But in a couple of the documentaries that I watched, I did see them talk about that.
Yeah.
And I thought, surely after that amount of time, the rigor mortis would have then released and the body would be back in a relaxed state.
But then maybe it was just a combination of rigor, but then also just the size of the suitcase, because it wasn't a big suitcase.
Yeah.
And to physically have put her in.
Yeah.
In order to manipulate, it's horrific to talk about, but in order to manipulate her body to fit her in, he would have had to break bones anyway.
But I think it was due. I think because it was due to that,
rather
not
than
due
the
to
rigor.
the rigor mortis. Yeah, it's just that he had to get her in such a confined space.
So she suffered broken arms, legs, and ribs, and they were all post-mortem. But again, there were signs of strangulation, which is just horrific to know that she'd been assaulted previously and that he'd strangled her.
Yeah.
And then to know that she was killed by him due to strangulation. It's just horrendous.
It is. These injuries are absolutely horrific, aren't they?
And for the family to hear about that in court as well. But ultimately, again, the family were there throughout the whole of the trial, and they were actually being kind of held in a family room while they were waiting for the verdict to come back. So this was on the 10th of August, and the jury went out at 10 a.m. and they actually returned at 2:30, which again is quite a quick turnaround time.
Yeah.
It was a unanimous decision, and the juryman or foreman got up and stated that they found Thomas Nutt guilty of murder, so it was murder, rather than manslaughter, at which point Nutt then turned and said, "Fuck you." He was actually ended up being removed from court, but I think that was after the judge had sentenced.
There's still no remorse there.
But there's no
like,
none
reaction
whatsoever
to it. Like,
so ultimately, the judge sentenced Nutt to a life in prison with minimum of 22 years. But because of that time that he'd been on remand, it took it to 21 years. And the family said that when they heard Thomas Nutt courtroom 3, they ran from this family room to the courtroom so that they could hear. Obviously, they were relieved that he'd got that sentence, but her mother Ginny did say that it's never enough.
It's not a happy time, and nothing is going to bring Dawn back. But in terms of sentencing, that's not too much of a
no.
I thought that was quite a good sentence. That he got.
So it's just another horrific case of a woman that did nothing but love her partner and her family, and was unfortunately, again, killed at the hands of someone she loved. I thought it might be quite nice to finish with what the family actually had written on her plaque.
Yeah.
So I'll read you that now. So, Dawn Louise Walker, taken too soon. Goodbyes are not forever, always in our hearts. A loving daughter, mum, nana, sis, and auntie. So it's just such a loss, isn't it?
It is. And I just thought I would end this on just a few little stats. You know what I'm like with my stats.
Yeah.
So every week in the UK, 2 women are murdered by a partner or an ex-partner, which I thought were absolutely shocking. 1 in 5 adults will experience domestic abuse at some point in their life.
Yeah.
And a domesticated related call is made to the police every 30 seconds. Like, it's horrendous, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you or anyone you know has been affected by this episode, there are places where you can get help. Women's Aid has got a really good website where they can talk you through things step by step, and they even show you how to cover your tracks online as well, which I think is really good.
Valuable.
If someone's been in a coercive relationship, you don't want anyone knowing that you've been getting that help.
And we'll put another link in as well, because obviously it's not always women that are the victims. So yeah, we'll put all the links in there. Hopefully you found the case interesting. Again, we are always trying to remember the victims. So let us know if there's any other cases you want us to cover.
Yep.
And other than that, thank you so much for tuning in.
Episode 1 done.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Take care.